So this is the iPhone 13 mini, and it's been 3 years, actually more than 3 years since the release of this smartphone. And while it no longer is available, or an iPhone's available in this size, today I want to talk about my honest review and why I think this was a one of a kind and one that might still be worth purchasing while you still have the chance. Let's talk about the price here. We have a price, at least secondhand, that is going for, and refurbished, sometimes renewed, stuff like that. You're around the $300 to $400 price tag. Now, brand new retail for the iPhone 13 mini 3 years ago was going for right around $700. And I actually think this is the reason why this phone did not succeed. The price point was simply too high. I mean, who's going to pay $700 plus tax when you can get a bigger phone for the same price? That was always, to me, the problem. If the iPhone 13 mini would have started at $399 or $450, this thing would have been a runaway hit. And just because you have an OLED screen, you do have yourself the Face ID. And even if Apple was to cut some of those things and just put a Touch ID scanner here, got rid of the Face ID, made this more of an all screen, this could have been a runaway hit, but that is not the decision that was made. So right now, I actually think the mini is a better deal than it was when it came out in terms of the price tag. It's closer to the price I thought it always should have been. And the good news is that this phone still performs very well and is still very usable. The next thing I want to talk about here 3 years later is the key specifications, and do they hold up? And the answer is they're fine. They're not insanely amazing anymore, but they're fine. A 5.4-inch OLED display dominates the front. This is a 60 Hz panel, and this is definitely not a 120 Hz panel. This is 60 Hz. Doesn't really matter at all to me on this phone, though. I really don't care. I'm not even using this phone a lot for, scrolling and stuff like that. So a ProMotion to me was never really necessary on a phone of this size. Also, that might have drained the battery more, so I don't really care here. Display holds up good. It's an OLED panel. Some people like LCDs, but this one wasn't it. The 5.4, though, was definitely not as compact as the older iPhone SE, and I'm talking about the squared body, the 5Ss. However, it was still much easier to reach in all corners than most of the current iPhones out there, and it's truly a nice one-handed size phone here in the iPhone 13 mini. Also, the specs of the battery, it's around 2478. It's closer to a older style iPhone in terms of the battery size. We're not over the 3000 milliamp hour mark, but the spec, it's fine. The way I think you're going to use this phone is for messaging, phone calls, a few apps here and there. If you're heavy using, why even buy this phone? I would just totally skip it. So 3 years later, I think the battery held up fine, and it was a marked improvement over the iPhone 12 mini, which was definitely abysmal in the battery life department. So I really like this one. I also like that this one got the upgraded A15 Bionic chip. This was also a very nice chip in here, very quick, and the iPhone 13, 13 Pro Max, and 13 Pro all still perform just fine. One of the things, though, with this phone, though, is that because it houses 4 gigabytes of RAM on board, this phone actually can start to reload apps here and there, depending on if you have a ton of them open. So if you do have a lot of these applications open at the same time, you definitely can run into a reload here and there. But is it a big issue? I would say absolutely not. It definitely doesn't run slow or anything like that. And this phone right now, even in 2024 at this current time, is not slowing me down whatsoever. I can do basically everything I want to do on the day-to-day, and it's just going to work. And it's going to work well. So that's the bottom line. This phone doesn't slow me down in the performance area. So yeah, you see all the specs here hold up pretty well. This phone does very good in those departments. In terms of the body and design, though, I also think that this is quite nice as well. We have the diagonal camera, no vertical camera up and down, but this shape in the feel is really reminiscent of, to me, the older iPhone 5S, and just with a more modern flair to it. So 3 years later, I think this held up well. I also think the glass back not being textured definitely looks very premium, sandwiched around the aluminum. Quite nice. I really love this red. This was one of the best reds Apple's done. I wish they would have put this red on a Pro model. That would be phenomenal. You'll see over here, we do have ourselves a silent switch, which is classic and useful. At the same time, no programmable action button. I could see a newer mini having an action button as well as a camera control button, but not this one. You'll see right here, volume rockers are fine, although you probably would hit that a lot. Also on the right side, power button, 5G antenna. At the bottom, we do have ourselves the lightning cable, so we never got to the area of USB-C with this phone. In addition, the speaker grill and microphone holes. Torque screws are pretty nicely lined up, so overall, just a clean, simple, nice design. We do really appreciate the iPhone 13 series. It was one of the best iPhone series out there. So 3 years later, I think the body holds up very nice. But the really thing about the iPhone 13 mini is it has like this this intangible thing you don't really think about too much. It's just that, well, it's that size. It's like, it just kind of hides in your pocket. It's like a phantom in your pocket. You just forget that it's there sometimes. And if you have big hands, this thing is definitely super easy and lightweight to handle. You'd be surprised though, but even certain people with larger hands really enjoy the mini just because of its easy to use nature. And if you have a smaller hand, this phone was definitely probably the right size for you. Another thing to keep in mind though, is that I think this doesn't really have that super mini, like it has the mini name, but it never really felt as small as like some of the older iPhones. So it's just a mini by comparison to other iPhones, but it's pretty decent size at 5.4. It's not like a tiny phone. It's a pretty decent sized screen. It kind of blends in. Once you start using it, you kind of forget that the screen is so small, but you never forget the weight. The super light weight of this phone, you never ever really forget that. So 3 years later, it's just one of a kind. There's just nothing like this on the market anymore in terms of like iPhones. So definitely, I mean, we have the SE, but that's got that really old iPhone 6 design. So I'm not going to call that anything super special at this point. This thing is just really unique still. When looking at the display, you are looking at a pretty tiny media experience over here. For the iPhone mini, there's the iPad mini, which is sticking around, but the mini iPhone is gone. You'll see it's definitely a really small media experience, but it is an OLED panel and it is very dense. So this screen does a pretty good job. It's also 19:9 aspect ratio, so it's not super narrow. It's just small, but still has kind of like the same feel as a larger iPhone. But really, the density of the text is actually higher than even some of the higher end iPhones. So this is 476 ppi, and then the sharpness of the text on like a newer iPhone is 460. So they crammed more pixels into a smaller display, which means that you have even sharper text when you are reading things of that sort. So definitely a really sharp panel. However, keep in mind though, with the iPhone 13 mini, it does require you to scroll more. So scrolling is kind of a necessity on this phone. It does happen quite a bit. If you don't like scrolling a lot, you won't like this phone. So that's just one of the cons of the mini here, even in now. Now, when it comes to the software, I actually really like using iOS on the mini, and it's because iOS to me always felt like it was designed for smaller phones. It doesn't really have this like huge split screen, multitasking, taking advantage of the larger screens. It always felt like it was designed for one hand. And this is definitely like you pull up here for this, you swipe here. It just seems like it was designed to be used one hand, but these newer phones, they definitely don't have that feel. Now, I'm not going to 18.1 yet. I'm on 17.7. The reason why is because some of the newer iPhones the newer software, they start to slow things down. I'm concerned about this draining my battery, so I'm going to stick with 17.7 for now. But on the topic of software, we just have our grid of icons. We have our app library, simple day-to-day use. And again, I don't even crave a split screen or anything on this phone. I don't care at all because I just want to do one-handed tasks and get on my way. So the iPhone mini seems to do this better than most when it comes to software. But still getting updates. It's still worthy of a purchase because you're still getting 18.0.1. You're not getting the Apple Intelligence, which is a shame. But at the same time, 4 gigs of RAM probably can't run that. That's a major con for all iPhones prior to iPhone 15 Pro series with the A17 Pro chips. But at the same time, again, this is a lightweight, easy to use phone. And I'm glad I have one because, in the future, this is going to be a classic that you just don't see these types of phones anymore. So definitely, I really do appreciate that. So when it comes to performance, I'm actually installing Geekbench 6 right here, We do have a phone that didn't have the fastest chip ever right now, but for the time, it was one of the fastest on the market. A15 Bionic clocked at 3.23 gigahertz and 4 gigabytes of RAM. Again, this phone doesn't need 8 to 12 gigs just because of, I think, the way a lot of people are going to use this product. It just doesn't need all that power because you're only going to be doing some lightweight stuff on this phone more than likely. So for me, the performance is just fine, and it does everything I would want an iPhone to do even now, all these years later. So I'm very happy with its performance. Again, it's not going to benchmark anything like some of the older or some of the newer iPhones, but definitely it's enough. I think it's fine. I'm not going to brag about it being amazing, but it's fine. Good thing about the iPhone 13 mini is it bought a base model of 128 gig. That's up from the 64 on the 12. So that was really good. So you can't really buy an iPhone 13 mini with super low storage. They all start base with 128 gig. So that was pretty nice. And that holds up pretty well. Even now, the base models are still 128 gig minimum. So I think they should start going 256 on all of them, but I'm not sure we're at that point just yet. So that's something to keep in mind. I also like the cameras on the iPhone mini, and I'll tell you why. It's not really, even all these years later, it's not really because they're not even close to some of the newer ones and pro level features, but they're still good. They're still iPhone cameras. And one of the best things about them, they have no focusing issues. They have no macro modes, so there's no like switching between lenses. It's just a fix. It's kind of like always fixed in the focus all the time. And, you know, it does have autofocus, obviously, but it's just smooth. Look at the transition between the lenses. Very, very smooth. In addition to that, the camera can still do 4K 60 on video. So a high quality video performance as well. You can do 4K 30. You can also do 4K 24. The Mini is super capable camera. I could still do tons of video on here even now. And the front-facing camera is also pretty similar to what we offer on some of the newer iPhones, still at 12 megapixel 4K 60. So the camera results on here are still great, especially in good lighting. So I am, again, yes, are the new ones better? Well, obviously, but are they like life-changing better than the iPhone 13 mini? The answer is no, they're not. So the mini can still do most of what the general consumer would want to do on the day-to-day with a camera on an iPhone. Now, one of the things that's not so great about the mini is the battery life. This is not a phone that is a road warrior all day, every day, super heavy use. This is a throw it in low power mode. Take it out of low power mode, it's up to you. Just throw it in your pocket, do a quick task, move on with your day. I like this non-distracting factor. I mean, any phone can be distracting, but there's something about the mini, you just don't want to use it as much as a big phone. It's just too small for like heavy use. You just tend to want to gravitate towards the larger screen of something else, whether it's a tablet or your laptop with this product. So it kind of retains that older kind of like use the phone, put it in your pocket, go about your day feel. And I love that about the mini. It's an intangible factor to the mini that is not really something that you get with larger phones. Larger phones draw me in. I feel like I want to be on my phone all day with these larger phones, but not the mini. The mini gives me that same iPhone experience, but kind of like in a much smaller package that's less distracting. But the battery life overall, because of that, usually gets me through a day. But if I was to say I'm going to go heavier use, like if I'm using it heavy, it's going to start making me a little concerned. I would definitely have this on the car charger. I would definitely charge this maybe 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, sometimes much earlier if I'm heavier using. And camera is a little bit of a drainer, especially video. But one of the biggest drains on this one was GPS. If I use GPS, I could destroy this battery very, very fast. It's less than 3,000, so it's not really great for heavy GPS use in terms of battery drain. Other than that, messaging, FaceTime, a couple phone calls, some browsing, some social media apps. This thing can get through a day if you're monitoring your use. Audio performance 3 years later, surprisingly enough, is still pretty loud. It doesn't sound quite as crisp and full as like the Pros, but it's still close to the same volume. Like when you blast the volume, it just sounds a little tinnier coming out of this phone, but still the audio performance is pretty good on this phone. Although the I/O, the connectivity is pretty dated with the Lightning. It is a 5.0 Bluetooth connection, so a little bit slower for that as well. In addition, We do have Wi-Fi 6, so no 6E, no 7, no nothing like that. So connectivity strength is getting a little bit older now, but still not going to slow you down in your day-to-day current world. It is 5G still, so it's still up to date with mobile data. Although the new modems are faster on the newer products, this thing is still enough for, I think, at least another 2 to 3 years. So in conclusion, 3 years later, I actually really still love this phone, and I definitely recommend this phone if you're looking for a secondhand mini, or if you found one new for a great deal. I think it's still a really good option. There's just nothing like it. If you want a small iPhone, this is still a recommended product. You can buy one now, still upgrade to iOS 18. You can use ChatGPT, the application, or some other AI-based apps like Copilot and stuff like that. You could download this for this. So you're not getting all the Apple intelligent features, but you can still get some AI-based features on here. So it's not like it's impossible. All iPhones can download those apps, and you'll be fine. So I think it's definitely a recommended option still. If you want a tiny iPhone, you got a couple years, 2 to 3 years left on this one before I would say it's pretty much not even worth it anymore. And probably after the next 2 years, it probably will be at that stage. But we still have some time. So I'm still going to say it's a go if you really want a tiny or small iPhone. This is still a nice option. So that's my take 3 years later. Still love this product. Let me know your thoughts on the iPhone 13 mini. Do you have one? Did you have one? Did you upgrade? Are you looking for another one? Did you get rid of it and you're like, man, I regret that? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more, and I will catch you all in the next episode. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.